Look, I know I like to cover niche political topics, and you guys are always begging for my views on more contemporary, relevant political happenings, not just local council drama and historical inter-Labor Party grievances. So I've listened. I'm going to give you guys a treat. Today we're going to talk about a very sexy silver fox world leader being replaced by a backstabbing deputy, Joe Biden. Once met the man who was the topic of today's video, Kevin Rudd. That's right, we're going to be talking about the Labor coup of 2010, where he was knifed by his deputy. I'm finally doing it. Buckle up. I'm going to be whinging about Julia Gillard for 15 minutes. Why? Well, because she's a woman, obviously. Gold Coast, Melbourne, Hobart and Geelong, I'm coming to your town soon with my brand new show, A Call to Neckbeards. Don't miss out. It's raunchy. You'll kick yourself if you do. If the absolute worst of Australia's professional managerial class needed an idol, it's gotta be Julia. I mean, maybe for those in the class that skin cats alive, throw the skin out and keep the carcass as a trophy. That crowd would like Mike Pizzullo, but for the unimpressive psychopaths of that class, Gillard for the win. Heralded as a Labor hero and feminist icon by these wax statues, not for any of her accomplishments that bettered the lives of Australians, but because of her personal success of rising through the Labor machine to become the first female Prime Minister. Julia Gillard serves as an inspiration for those in which private aspiration and ambition are the only values that are intelligible. Individual success is a pretty poor barometer to holistically measure politicians by. I mean, if being a high achiever or overcoming a glass ceiling meant that you were automatically going to improve the lives of everyone, if only you held political office. Trust me, I'd be out there campaigning for Steve-O for president. He'd break a glass ceiling, literally and metaphorically, probably skydive into one while jacking off, crash through it for the inauguration to become the first president to have also been human shark bait. But overcoming a glass ceiling is no marker that you're going to be good in office. It seems to be how virtually all of Australia's media and political elite comes to retroactively define a politician's success. Of course, if they're in Labor, only when they're out of office, because you wouldn't want to keep them in there for too long. She was eaten alive when she did hold office, but after that, and up until quite recently, the popular sentiment pushed by self-proclaimed politically aware people, you know, the lefties and progressives and small L liberals, just anyone who's in the mailing list for the up-and-coming musicals at the fucking Sydney Lyric Theatre. They thought Julia Gillard, Labor legend, Kevin Rudd, Labor rad, or narcissist or psychopath, whatever half-baked Freudian analysis was being pushed by the media based almost entirely on the fact that there's recordings of Kevin Rudd swearing.
Fucking hopeless.
Totally unfair, because why is nobody in the press psychoanalyzing Holly Hughes? Clearly some sort of Buffalo Bill type thing going on there. There has been a bit of a course correction recently, as I think more people have come to appreciate Rudd's continued engagement with big issues, you know, Murdoch's control of Western media, the looming threat of nuclear war between the USA and China, how to achieve the best dog shot in handball. What the fuck has Gillard done recently? Defended Israel's right not to be criticised on TikTok. And look, to be fair to her, Ben Shapiro has made an entire career out of doing that, but I still feel I have to set the record straight. Kevin Rudd is a Labor legend. Julia Gillard, whilst being one of our best Prime Ministers, that is only because most of our Prime Ministers have been Liberals. She is probably the shittest Labor Prime Minister Australia's ever had, and the way that she took over from Rudd was unashamedly self-interested at best and subversive, not even at worst. We don't even know the whole story yet, but everything surrounding the coup, very off. On the metrics that matter to me, Kevin Rudd was a far more impressive leader, even if you use the markers that are used to mainly evaluate Gillard, personal success, but remove the most vacuous identity politics of Julia Gillard was a woman from the equation, and then Kevin Rudd's personal story is far more compelling than Julia Gillard's. Gillard was born in Wales. Red flag straight off the mark. Moved to Adelaide as a child, another red flag. Moved to Melbourne for uni. Fuck, 3 in a row. Studied arts and law, then became an industrial lawyer. All right, there you go. Moving up through the Labor machine, eventually getting pre-selected for a Labor safe seat, and yeah, we know the rest. Wow, how inspiring. Never heard of that career path before. Really breaking the diversity quota of Parliament there with yet another lawyer. Rudd, on the other hand, born in Queensland, green flag straight off the mark. That's the only time I'm going to bother saying green flag, because everything else is just green flags. He grew up on a dairy share farm. His dad died in a car accident when he was 11, which feels fucked doing this, but His family was then kicked off the farm because of that. Rudd was then sent to a pretty brutal boarding school, and he eventually ended up at ANU studying arts, but don't worry, no law. He was majoring in Chinese language. Rudd then went to work for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and was in China, where he was initially tapped to be the model for the Darucci mattresses, yet got fired for refusing to wink in every photograph. Sorry, that is a way cooler story. Child of a Queensland dairy farmer being such a mega spurg that he resists so many environmental influences. For fuck's sake, he was in Queensland in the 60s and 70s and decides, I'm going to be the original we, but for shit Japan. And yet still has good enough social skills to rizz up all of Australia. In fact, there's already a huge point in Rudd's favour. Massive rizzler, genius campaigner. He was one of only 4 post-war Labor leaders to win from opposition, whereas Gillard won leadership by backstabbing that leader and immediately squandering the significant majority he secured only 3 years earlier. And just before we get into looking at Gillard and Rudd's actual accomplishments from their time as Prime Ministers, I also do have to make this plea. Kevin, for your own legacy's sake, you got to start adding brain rot terms to your vocabulary. The only way you're going to get through to these mushheads is if you get on Twitch. China's Belt and Road Initiative, in essence, is an attempt to skibbity rizz up sections of the global community. Just as, for instance, how Baby Gronk rizzed up Livy Dunn. When these smaller states become Belt and Road pills, China encourages them to debt max in pursuance of an ultimate goal of creating institutions that are independent sigmas, if you will, of the US-led liberal world order. Xi is trying to get a W on his ongoing strategic competition to mob the USA. My concern is that this strategic hedging could blow out into a full-blown coming. Anyway, enough questions. I saw a level 600 gat. I'm gonna go goon now. Another point in Kevin Rudd's favour. His voice is funny and likeable. And that was also 100% accurate as to what his voice sounds like. And if that's not enough reason to like him, this video could be over in a point. Kevin Rudd shielded Australia from the global financial crisis. Now, there's going to be a bunch of idiots in the comments who every time say, oh, China did that. That is utter media propaganda nonsense that we've debunked on this channel 100 times before. But that's the main accomplishment that everyone points to for Rudd's time in office, making Australia the only major developed economy that avoided a recession. What do the pundits point to as Gillard's major achievement? She made a speech once. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of achievements from Gillard's time in office, but that speech is what the media point to as her most iconic achievement. And it says a lot that historical rankings of Rudd are fairly scathing, whilst Gillard's are quite positive, which is an inverse of popular sentiment in Australia. Because the misogyny speech, and I'm saying this as a self-professed Labor hack of over 10 years of defending that party, I've got the license to say this, that speech was as cynical a politician as you could get. That was the weaponisation of the shallowest markers of identity to shield Gillard and the government from other cynically weaponised accusations of sexism by Tony Abbott and the coalition against then Speaker Peter Slipper, a speaker which Gillard needed as she squandered all of Rudd's majority in one election. The only thing more cynical than that speech is the way that it's been paraded around for over a decade after the fact as this marker of women's liberation when, on the same day as that speech, Gillard's government cut the pension for single parents, hint, they're mostly mothers, a move that caused a rise in child poverty and was undoubtedly opposed by many in the Labor caucus. Rudd absolutely despised the move, and just a year later Albanese, who was raised by a single mum himself, was criticising the move as well, and reversed it in his second budget as Prime Minister. But let's get to the coup and all the very fishy circumstances surrounding it, because in 2010, Kevin Rudd made the same mistake as another slain Labor leader before him, Gough Whitlam. He tried to secure more of Australia's own wealth for Australians. He was attempting to implement what was called the resource super profits tax, the mining tax, a 40% tax on mining profits. This proposal greatly incensed the foreign mining companies that had been plundering Australia's wealth since forever, paying very little tax. In response, the mining industry launched an unprecedented advertising campaign aimed at toppling the PM, spending tens of millions of dollars in the less than 2 months before Rudd was ousted by Gillard. The Rudd government launched a pro-mining tax ad campaign in response. But it was too late. On the 24th of June 2010, Gillard launched a successful leadership spill against Rudd. And in the very first press conference she gives after knifing him and becoming the first female Prime Minister of Australia, keep in mind, this is her first public speech as Prime Minister, the supposed moment that a huge glass ceiling was shattered. She says,
Australians are entitled to a fairer share of our inheritance, the mineral wealth that lies in our grounds. They are entitled to that fairer share. But to reach a consensus, we need to do more than consult. we need to negotiate. And we must end this uncertainty, which is not good for this nation. That's why today I am throwing open the government's door to the mining industry, and I ask that in return the mining industry throws open its mind. And today I will ensure that the mining advertisements paid for by the government are cancelled. And in return for this, I ask the mining industry to cease their advertising campaign as a show of good faith and mutual respect.
Wow. What a day for the history books, eh? The first woman to be blackmailed by the mining industry into not taxing them. No, that's not true. She wasn't blackmailed. She was a rank opportunist who saw an anti-democratic campaign by foreign mining companies as a chance to further her own career. And she was the woman. Now, that mining industry ad campaign blitz against Rudd was an effective subversion of democracy. However, it didn't fuck his polls badly enough to justify Gillard's knifing. At the time of the coup, Rudd was still the Rizzler, still winning almost every major two-party preferred poll and preferred Prime Minister poll. Compare that to Gillard, who after enjoying a very brief bump in the polls in the 2010 election, squandered Rudd's majority and scraped into minority government with a hair over 50% of the two-party preferred vote. A remarkable indictment on her leadership to almost lose government for Labor after only one term with one of the biggest majorities they ever had. Negative L-Riz amongst us much? Is that how to do brain rot?
Yes, he doesn't know what among us is. He just wrote that in and said amongst us instead.
And I won't find out after this either. The mining industry weren't the only co-conspirators of the coup, Gillard nods to in her first speech.
To keep the peace and to honour the US and the other alliances that are so important for our nation.
Ah, how surprising. Why would the US want to interfere with Australian politics? Well, the answer is Kevin Rudd was, and is, just like Gaddafi. That's right, c***. When I went to that strip club, I was recruiting bodyguards at the same time. In more than one way. Because he was also leading Australia in a way that was too sovereign for those in the US deep state. Now, Rudd wasn't and isn't some anti-US radical or ungrateful tanky pig, as this portly kebab shop owner keeps accusing me of being. Rudd was just too much of a dreamer for the USA's liking. Funny that, because Joe Biden also got ousted for being a different type of dreamer, am I right? But Kevin Rudd was a dreamer in that he preferred diplomacy over an extremely avoidable Third World War. Diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks show how the USA was concerned by Rudd's proposal for an Asia-Pacific community which included China, and a fundamental objective of this body was that it would be used to diffuse tensions between competing powers in the Pacific. The horror. The US ambassador in Canberra wasn't too happy either with the Rudd government's decision to continue on the Howard government's decision for Australia to not participate in the quadrilateral security dialogue. Then, as I've mentioned over and over before, most recently in this video on the Israel lobby, WikiLeaks diplomatic cables also revealed the same power brokers that organised Rudd to be toppled by Gillard were protected sources, informing the USA of Gillard's blindly pro-Israel, pro-alliance politics, lining her up to be Rudd's successor. Mark Habib, Paul Howes, Michael Cooney. After Gillard, where did they go? Poof! They all disappeared from the Labor movement. Mark Habib went on to work for Crown Casino, Paul Howes working for KPMG. Okay, Michael Cooney is still a Labor lawyer, but today we're on the fuck lawyers train, and till I need lawyers again, which will probably be tomorrow as Drew is threatening to sue. Skibbity, hit the gritty, fuck. Gillard's tenure represented the complete and utter death of partially independent Australian foreign policy, marking the beginning of over a decade of complete deference to whatever the USA demands. And as I've mentioned before in the same Israel video, Foreign Minister Bob Carr detailed how he was often at odds with Gillard over his attempt to vote in line with the vast majority of states on the UN on even minor matters that pertain to Israel. It was under Gillard in 2011 to Australian Parliament, not from the White House, in which President Obama announced the USA's pivot to Asia, i.e. strategic edging with China. It was also during this visit when Obama announced US Marines would be stationed in Darwin. And while we're on military shit, Look at what she did for Australia re-Afghanistan. This is why I find it truly bizarre when people call for minority government with independents and the Greens to hold Labor to account. The one example we have of that produced a far more conservative, far less imaginative, far less popular Labor government than any Labor government before it. A government whose crowning achievement, the carbon tax, was reversed straight after they were booted out, in one term, with the unpopularity of that government leading to 10 years of coalition rule. Because, here's a little secret, just replacing professional managerial class Labor hacks with professional managerial class Green hacks is redundant. In fact, it's worse than redundant. From the one example we have of it, replacing one form of party politics with another form of party politics seems to just dilute effectiveness. What a surprise when it seems that the people that you are replacing seem to know nothing about power at all, which I'm pretty sure is the case, as these people are always mindlessly yelling, "We need minority government to hold the Labor Party to account," and their single dot point every time is, "Look at how much legislation we got passed." Yes, you got to put your signature on a bunch of policy that was incubated under the rug government. It's just that policy takes a little longer to formulate than a Facebook post. You know who best utilised minority government to hold Labor to account? The mining industry, the USA lobby, the Israel lobby, and the coalition. The same forces which undid Gough Whitlam 35 years earlier, took down another Prime Minister in 2010, and many elements of self-proclaimed lefties in this country look to this coup and the years following it as this golden age to be replicated, and hold its instigator as an Australian icon who we're meant to adorate for years to come. Not me. Julia Gillard is a Labor rat. And even then, so much better than any fucking Liberal.